on the workbench today we have a TB7100 repeater. So this is a Tait repeater. It's 1 unit high. There's not much to see from the outside, but let's just run a lot across the front of this. Anyway, here's some fans, obviously a ducted cooling system. We've got a microphone and programming port here with a transmit and receive switch. The switch switches your programming between the transmitter and receiver half of this unit. We've got a LED indicator here, some basic panels, some basic panel controls with function buttons that can be programmed, and some indicator LEDs and a volume control. And along the end, of course, we've got a speaker. We'll turn this around and have a look at the rear end of this. Okay, across the back we've got a ground terminal, input output port, obviously a system, put a system plug on there. There's some potentiometer adjustments that can be made there. The DC input and a fuse. This particular repeater has had the receiver hole blanked off, and we've got an output out of in the transmit hole. That tells me straight away that this unit's probably fitted with a duplexer, and some cooling coming out that right hand side there. Access to the components inside this repeater is organised by removing the top lid. There we have it. Right, the first thing we see inside this repeater is that it's fitted with a duplexer. This is a Procom duplexer. They're made in Denmark. They're fairly high quality. So we have the transmit port there. It's labelled high on the duplexer. We have the receiver into the low port there, and there's the antenna. So in this case the antenna cable is run through here and appears out the back of the repeater. These two cables here go to the receiver and transmitter respectively, and of course a duplexer uses frequency separation between the transmit and receive to achieve some isolation between the transmitter and the receiver, and it enables you to both receive and transmit at the same time via a single antenna. Now the Procom unit is adjusted. You tune these duplexers. There's three individual cavities here between the receiver and the antenna, and there's another 3 cavities here between the transmitter and the antenna, and the tuning screws are mounted on the end of the duplexer here. You'll obviously have to take this duplexer, probably take it right out of here to tune it. You tune this with a spectrum analyzer. That's how I do it anyway. Okay, turning around a little bit, we have I would say that's the receiver, that's the transmitter, and we have an interface. Now let me explain the reason why I think that that's the way the layout's organised. We have here 2 fans and a duct that runs down under here, and there's the standoffs underneath this particular board. But down the back here, it appears as though this board is mounted quite solidly onto a heatsink that has the air blowing past it, and I would guess that that thing mounted on there is a temperature sensor, and it's feeding temperature sensing data into the interface board. Okay, so this repeater, essentially it's made up from 2 TM8000 mobiles. So you'll notice that this is identical to this. So these are typically mobile, they're boards removed from TM8000 mobile radios. This one's obviously configured to be the receiver, and that's the transmitter. and the functionality of the radio is achieved by interfacing controls onto these two boards, and there's a bunch of ribbon cables here that go to the interface. So this interface board is a TB7100 interface system. The Tait part number is 220-02077-04, and this is the board that you can access from the rear of the radio. There's some screws on here for obviously setting levels. We've got some adjustments here as well, and we've got header pins that are standing up that we've got links that you can transpose here to do various functions. Anyway, that's essentially what the repeater looks like on the inside. Yeah, well, if we get a little bit closer to one of these, you will see that the component density here is pretty extreme. As the technology of radio developed and the component density came up, it became more and more critical to screen various components, and that in itself actually makes servicing these radios quite difficult, because to get to an individual component in here, you have to actually remove this screen before you can actually get to the circuitry below it. It's now almost at the point where it's not really worthwhile to service this type of equipment down to component level. It's quite difficult to get down to individual component level. Now these things are manufactured on a machine. The circuit board is coated with a flux that enables the soldering process to occur, and then these components, tiny as they are machine placed. They're literally glued into the flux. The flux holds them in place until the solder flow literally solders everything in place, and that solder flow process is a single process, and then it's all over. It's getting incredibly difficult to service this kind of radio gear, and because they're manufactured, machine manufactured, it's probably cheaper to just completely replace the entire board. That's about all we can discover by looking into here. Now these particular repeaters are analog. It's an analog radio. You know, this is at least 10 years old, this particular repeater. The new world's definitely going digital. I would imagine that the newer repeaters would have higher component density still. To do any service work on this, of course, you'll need a manual. The T2000 was the last series of radio I did extensive service work on, and the manual for the T2000 was a fairly large book, although they started to release a lot of that information on a CD as well. Modern stuff, of course, you won't find a service manual in the form of a book. More likely, if you get a service manual, it'll be downloaded from the company website. One thing I should note here is there's very little for a technician to do inside of here. Adjustment of radio gear now is done with calibration software. In the good old days, you'd be inside of here with a tuning tool. Now the only thing you actually tune as such is the slugs in the duplexer. And of course, any adjustment that you need to make frequency wise or deviation wise or anything like that, it's all done with software.